agenda is set. Hello everyone, I'm Ali Hassan in Berlin. Today on the show, whistleblowing, US foreign policy, and a political earthquake in Italy. That and more today. It's time to talk. US soldier Bradley Manning speaks out for the first time, revealing his true intentions in leaking classified documents to WikiLeaks. Is Private Manning an anti-war hero or a traitor to his country? And what does his case mean for whistleblowers worldwide? America has a new Secretary of State. What does this mean for world affairs? John Kerry has made his first trip abroad, starting off his tour with visits to America's traditional allies. Is US foreign policy turning away from Asia and back towards Europe and the Middle East? And Italy is in gridlock after last week's election, thanks to the surprising rise of a comedian and his supporters. Comedian Beppe Grillo and his five-star movement have shaken up Italy by winning 25% of the vote. But can the movement deliver and change Italian politics for good? Or is it just a short-lived phenomenon? I have invited three people today to talk and argue about these headlines. My first guest is the organizer of the Friends of Beppe Grillo in Berlin and has been involved with the five-star movement since 2005. I'm happy to welcome to the show Marcello Pilato. Marcello, are we seeing the end of politics as usual in Italy?
Yes, I think so, because our movement wants to re-establish a very direct democracy, starting from the people.
And of course, we will talk more about that later on. My second guest says the new Secretary of State, John Kerry, will have a positive influence on US foreign policy. I'm happy to welcome to the show Sudha David Wilp. She's a senior program officer at the German Marshall Fund. Sudha, do you think we are seeing a change of focus in US foreign policy?
No, I don't think there's going to be a change of focus, but certainly there's a different tone that was set with Secretary Kerry's first visit with the traditional allies in Europe and then swinging over to the Middle East to the crisis region. So certainly the tone is different, but the focus remains the same.
The focus remains the same, says David Wilp. More on that later on. And my next guest says all whistleblowers are motivated by a moral cause. I'm happy to welcome to the show Daniel Domscheit-Berg. He's the co-founder and former spokesperson of WikiLeaks. Daniel, will Bradley Manning's trial have a negative impact on whistleblowing?
I hope it actually will not have a negative impact, but will rather trigger a much needed debate about a reform for whistleblower laws, especially in the legal field.
And we'll talk more about that in a moment. 1,000 days, that's how long US soldier Bradley Manning has been imprisoned for passing classified documents to WikiLeaks. He has recently admitted making the leaks, but says he believed the American people had a right to know the true costs of war. Private Manning has a global network of supporters who regard him an anti-war hero. But there are others who see him a traitor who published secret intelligence and helped the enemy. Manning's case may end up having a big impact on whistleblowing worldwide.
This is the first time Bradley Manning has admitted passing secret documents to WikiLeaks. The U.S. Army private pleaded guilty to misusing classified material, but he denied the more serious charge of aiding the enemy. Manning told the judge at his court-martial that the material included some of the most significant documents of our time. He said he hoped making them public would spark a debate on the role of the military and on foreign policy.
That's a weapon.
Meanwhile, WikiLeaks faces a blockade by banks, cutting off its main source of funding. WikiLeaks and other whistleblowing websites have had problems staying online. But the need for insiders to tell the world when they believe there is wrongdoing within institutions remains. So what is the future for whistleblowing?
What is the future of whistleblowing? We'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's talk about this case. Let's talk about Bradley Manning. As we've said before, many people either regard him as a hero or a traitor. How do you see him?
Well, I think it's perfectly natural that this is the case, because that's what whistleblowing is about. It's polarizing in some way, and there always is a side that would see somebody as a traitor, whereas others sees it as a good thing. So from where I stand, what Bradley Manning did, if he was the source for this material, was the act of a courageous whistleblower that was trying to bring attention to facts that he deemed to be in the public interest. So with whistleblowers, this is a problem. It's always subjective. It's always a subjective decision of a person to go on with this. You usually look at something that can be an unlawful right versus a lawful wrong. And I think this is a particular situation where we have exactly that problem.
And while at WikiLeaks, it's my understanding that you've had contact with Bradley Manning, or a person believed to be Bradley Manning at that point. What was your impression of him back then?
Well, my impression was that, as with many other people we had contact with, that there was a genuine interest to do something that is in the public interest. So I had never had the feeling that I dealt with somebody that was trying to damage the United States, for example, or that was trying to do harm to people somewhere in the field, but rather the contrary, somebody that was very much reflecting on what was going on, that was highly disturbed by what he was witnessing, and that was looking for a way to do something that his conscience was calling for.
Did you encourage him to pass on the documents?
We've never actively encouraged people to do whatever. We were just offering the means to do so, and we were trying to educate people about what this means, but that's about it. So.
And you've just offered the means. You're saying he's been in jail now for 1,000 days.
Yes.
Do you feel sorry for him?
Well, absolutely. And there's not a very small amount of guilt also that carries.
You feel responsible?
With it. Yes, absolutely. So even if we haven't done anything that has directly damaged him in some way, or if we haven't betrayed him, he still dealt with us, and whatever happened, he's facing this situation now. So I feel very sorry for him, and I think it's not the way he should be treated.
And do you even expect to be perhaps called as a witness or face prosecution yourself at some point for this particular case?
That's a very hypothetical question, and I spoke to a couple of lawyers, and there's nobody that could answer that. So I don't know. I guess the future will tell.
And let's talk about whistleblowing in general.
Yes.
Whistleblowing, one might say objectively, is not in a good shape these days. Bradley Manning is in jail. WikiLeaks, as we know it, somewhat in a crisis. Founder Julian Assange now in the embassy of Ecuador in the UK. Do you think whistleblowing itself is in a crisis?
I actually think it's in a much better shape than any time before, because it has been put in the public sphere for sure and for granted for the first time, at least as long as I'm aware of this topic. It has arrived in my grandfather's living room, and in Germany we don't even have a word for this, so we're lacking the concept of a positive betrayer of a secret. And this is what has arrived here. And what we see worldwide is a very lively and big debate about the need to refocus transparency, or to maybe redefine what we take as transparent and what we take as secret. So I think this is a very much needed debate, and in that respect I think it's in a much better shape than before.
So if I understand you correctly, you think that there is a need for legislation to protect whistleblowers. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, well, ultimately I think we need well-regulated mechanisms to deal with these types of topics. So I think the solution cannot be that we're offering services on the internet to maneuver around deficiencies in the legal system. So I think we certainly need a new legal regime, and whether that is maybe in the US military, where I think improvement needs to be done, or in the German federal system, where there's no law at all to protect whistleblowers whatsoever.
And indeed, we are seeing in this particular case of Bradley Manning,
yes,
some see him as a traitor, some as a hero, some say he's a whistleblower. Who defines what a whistleblower is? Who defines what whistleblowing is?
That's where the problem begins, actually. So there is a definition, for example, in the US military system. What makes a whistleblower? You have to adhere to a certain chain of command in how you report what you witness. And I think this is where he did not comply to the formal way that was foreseen for a member of the US military. This is why defending him as a US whistleblower in a US military case might be complicated. But nevertheless, I think all the rest of the world, all the people that have seen, for example, the Collateral Murder video, would challenge that perception. And this is where we have to redefine maybe what makes a whistleblower. And this is where this whole debate is very, very important.
And indeed, Suda, this case has obviously gained a lot of attention in the United States for obvious reason. How is Manning generally regarded in the U.S.?
Well, you know, before coming to Berlin last year, I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. around public servants. And I think mainstream America and government officials do not agree with Manning's actions. I think they see this as a clear betrayal. He took an oath. He worked with classified information, and he should have followed a chain of command if he felt troubled, and he didn't do that. So I think that mainstream America and sort of government circles wouldn't agree and call him a whistleblower. For example, like the whistleblowing that happened in the tobacco industry years ago,
yes,
that made a lot of good reform, but I don't think you can compare this to that.
And so, what's your personal view of him? It seems to me that, from what I'm getting, he's generally not perceived well in the United States, from what I'm gathering, from what you're telling me. What about you personally?
Personally, I do, as you would say, I do sympathize with his plight, because perhaps the military needs to put processes in place, an ombudsman, so that he could have gone to somebody to talk to. Perhaps he felt he couldn't follow a chain of command and talk to people. So certainly there needs to be more interaction within the military for people like Bradley Manning. But I think he put people in danger. It was good reading. I mean, I read some of the excerpts in the New York Times, but certainly I thought to myself, my colleagues that work at the U.S. State Department, they put a lot of time and energy into their work and work on behalf of the U.S. government, the American people, and to then see some of these briefs that were classified, published, I mean, I found that astounding and a little sad.
There are some people who are saying that it is also a sign, perhaps even a sign of failure of U.S. security policy, that somebody like Bradley Manning had to resort to such drastic measures.
I mean, I think there needs to be vetting of who has access to this sort of information so it doesn't happen again. I mean, perhaps he wasn't in the right state of mind to deal with this information. So, yes, I agree with that.
And Manning's biographer, Denver Nix, even goes as far as to suggest that the leaks perhaps served as a catalyst behind the Arab Spring movement. Would you agree?
I mean, that could be. I mean, I think we're still in the thick of things with the Arab Spring. I think it's very hard to talk about the causes of the Arab Spring. It's you know, 2020 is hindsight, and I don't think we're there yet. Certainly, people may even mention that because of George Bush's invasion of Iraq, that's why we have the Arab Spring. So I think it's too early to say that.
Marcello, obviously the internet was very important for Bradley Manning, for him to get the word out, to get the documents out. The internet is very important to the Beppe Grillo movement as well. Would you say that the importance of the internet cannot be overstated here?
Yeah, I mean, I start from the very beginning of our movement, where at the beginning we were just organized on single meetups around Italy. Now we have around 2,000, you can imagine, 2,000 different meetups in Italy and all around the world as well. And this kind of meetups get connected, each people part of the movement.
But back to Bradley Manning in this particular case.
And this is, I mean,
the essence of the internet for Bradley Manning here.
For us, I mean, the divulgation of information should be something that could be shared once the information are not making the damage on people, first of all, but to make clear that something was wrong.
Daniel, do you think this case would have been possible without the internet?
No, I don't think so. And I actually think, as you said, you cannot overstate the role of the internet in these days. It's a real game changer in who can communicate with whom, and the way of on how we're all peers among peers, so to say. And in that respect, it changes how people tell each other about what they are witnessing and how they are communicating information. And I think in this particular case, it would certainly not have been possible without any of this technology. He couldn't even have removed this data from a computer without technology.
Well, so far on this particular case, clearly Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton bucked tradition by making her maiden voyage to Asia. But her successor, John Kerry, is turning once again to America's traditional allies in Europe and the Arab world to solve the many unresolved conflicts in the Middle East.
9 countries in 11 days. John Kerry's first official trip as Secretary of State offered a taste of the punishing schedule the job entails. In European capitals, the focus was on developing a consensus on the war in Syria. In Berlin, Kerry met the Russian foreign minister. He hopes Moscow will increase pressure on the Assad regime. In Rome, he announced for the first time that the U.S. would give direct aid to moderate rebel groups in the country.
We are determined to find a way forward to a better day that we know awaits Syria, a day that will not come as long as Assad is in power.
In Egypt, Kerry met President Morsi and offered financial support for the country's reform efforts. And in Saudi Arabia, the new Secretary of State warned about Iran's nuclear program. The window for diplomacy, he said, cannot remain open indefinitely. John Kerry has begun his new job with a focus on the intractable problems of the Middle East. Will that emphasis continue in the months ahead?
Well, Suda, many stops for Kerry on his first trip abroad, to Berlin, to London, to Paris. And he's a bit of a Europhile, isn't it, John Kerry?
Yes, in fact, he speaks French. Many people don't know that, but yes, he's a fluent speaker of French. And I think he tried out a few words when he was in Paris at a press conference.
And do you think that this emphasis back to the traditional U.S. allies, do you think that it means back to business as usual for U.S. foreign policy?
I think U.S. foreign policy is always going to have both one foot in the Atlantic and one foot in the Pacific. There's no doubt that Asia is on the rise. It already is. And the United States can't ignore China and all the military conflicts that are going on with Japan and other Asian countries in the region. But certainly, I think there is a return back to the roots. President Obama mentioned his goal of establishing a free trade agreement between Europe and the U.S. in a State of the Union. And I think, Kerry, that was also brought up this topic on many of his stops in Europe.
And what do you think was the most important aspect of John Kerry's visit?
I think the most important aspect of his visit was he knows that he needs the traditional allies to work on these challenges in the Middle East, Syria, Iran. He needs to talk to Russia. He needs to talk to France, Great Britain. And I think the transatlantic relationship in general, there's a consensus now that German-American relations, U.S.-European relations, all is somewhat good. But together we need to work in order to solve out-of-area conflicts.
And there are many people who are saying that President Obama's foreign policy in his first term has been very inconsistent and timid. Would you agree?
I don't think so. I personally think that this White House has been very strong in taking over the helm of foreign policy. It's very surprising that Secretary Clinton actually sort of took not a back seat, but she really became a team player in the administration. And a lot of foreign policy came out of the White House. It will be interesting to see what John Kerry does as Secretary of State. If he sort of toes the line with the administration, what comes out of the White House, will he get along with the National Security Advisor, or will he carve out his own path from Foggy Bottom at the State Department?
And how much influence, Suda, do you think he will eventually have? We all know that he was not President Obama's first choice.
That's right.
President Obama wanted Susan Rice to be the new Secretary of State. Now it's John Kerry. How much influence do you think he will have, considering that he wasn't President Obama's first choice?
I think, going back to what I said about the White House, if Tom Donilon stays at as National Security Advisor, then I think Secretary Kerry will definitely forge a strong profile on the world stage. I mean, he already has the credentials. He was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's got personal relationships with world leaders. But, you know, there are some rumors that perhaps Susan Rice could become National Security Advisor, and that may then change the dynamic a little bit. But let's remember, this is Secretary Kerry's probably his last run. I mean, he sort of reached the apex of his career with this position. I don't, you know, after the second administration is over, this is sort of his crowning achievement. So he has nothing to lose. I think he's going to want to get out there and establish a legacy for himself.
And some people are interpreting this trip and the stops he made and the statements he made, first and foremost, as a sign that the U.S. is starting to embrace the role once again as global policeman, as a global leader again. Would you agree?
I don't think there was ever I don't think there was ever a shift to isolationism in the U.S. I think in the United States, there is an understanding that we do have to play a role in the world stage, and I think Kerry said that at his sort of his first public speech at the University of Virginia. You know, there's nothing foreign about foreign policy.
You say that, but isn't it true that the U.S. more often than not recently has been leading more from behind? In the case of Libya, in the case of Mali, it wasn't the U.S. who took the lead.
I think leading from behind is just a nice euphemism. I think behind the scenes, the United States was certainly providing a lot of military support, intelligence. But, you know, it was convenient for election politics for President Obama to maybe actually, and he regrets that phrase probably, saying leading from behind and giving more of the burden to our allies.
And how much political capital do you think President Obama is willing to spend on the many problems that awaits him in the Middle East?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ali. You know, President Obama has huge domestic challenges. Like Secretary Kerry, this is his opportunity to create his legacy. And he definitely wants to go back to the things that he said he was going to change in America in 2008. He wants to work on immigration reform. The United States is facing a huge fiscal and budgetary crisis. He wants to work on, you know, homosexual rights or civil rights in the United States. I think he is going to maybe delegate a few things to his National Security Advisor and Secretary Kerry to work on these different problems, as well as, don't forget, Vice President Biden. He certainly is very well versed in foreign policy as well.
Well, Daniel, a lot on President Obama's plate in the second term, no doubt. Former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright once called the U.S. the indispensable nation. Would you say that statement still holds true today?
Well, I think in the geopolitical sphere that we see today, they are indispensable. I'm just not entirely sure what the future holds. So I think lots of changes are happening, especially if we look to what's happening in China. So I'm not entirely sure if at some stage we will, this picture will continue like we see today. I think a lot will change. On the other hand, I hope at some stage we will all understand that we're all kind of indispensable here, or that this is the wrong question to ask maybe.
And Syria, of course, is one big problem that the U.S. and the world needs to face. The internet plays somewhat of a big role in the U.S. with the many videos and infos that are coming out. Do you think that President Obama will be able to solve this particular problem?
I'm not entirely sure how much you can solve that problem, or if there's a solution to any of these situations, especially in the Middle East and in these regions. But I certainly hope that there's progress there, and that if we're all open-minded enough, and if we're willing to help and to also deal with these situations and to understand them, then there is progress possible. And maybe that leads to a solution in one way or the other.
How do you view America's role in general in world affairs?
Well, they're a pretty powerful player. So, and they're very dominant in the way that they are involving in the geopolitical stage. So that has some advantages. On the other hand, sometimes I personally would wish that they would be stepping back a little bit and maybe let some things be settled differently.
And Marcello, John Kerry also made a statement that Beppe Grillo is no danger for Italy. You must be pleased.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we are happy with this kind of declaration because he recognized that the direct democracy cannot be a danger for a country.
And what do you expect of John Kerry in the second
term. That our movement became a real interlocutor with all the country as well. So to re-establish, as I told you before, very direct democracy is also re-establish also a good connection with our country as well.
And Suda, you said that you're hoping, or rather you believe, that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry will make an excellent Secretary of State. What makes you think that?
I think, like I said, I think he's at the, I don't want to say twilight of his career, but he really has nothing to lose. I mean, he and his father was in the State Department. So this man he's always seen public, or has done public service. And I think that for him, I think this is a natural role for him on behalf of the United States government. I'm really glad that this worked out, and I think he will also bring some nuance to the job. So I think it's a good thing.
All right, so we will continue to look for the U.S. to take the lead in some issues in world affairs, and we will continue to look at John Kerry in particular. Italian comedian turned activist Beppe Grillo has really shaken up the country's politics, and not everyone is smiling. By getting 25% of the vote in the last election, Grillo's five-star movement is now in the position to be the kingmaker. What started as a small online protest platform is now a real force to be reckoned with. Time to take a closer look at the movement and its goals.
What exactly does Beppe Grillo want? That is an open question more than a week after the election in which his five-star movement won around a quarter of the vote. The comedian turned activist says Italy's political class is corrupt and makes no secret of wanting to bring about radical change. His critics fear he's an autocrat whose goal may be not just to change the system, but to destroy it. Grillo's rise has in part been the result of his use of blogging and social media, and he talks of the transforming power of the internet. His campaign has attracted many younger supporters, and he wants to harness what he calls their democratic rage. Grillo talks about tackling poverty and ending austerity. And he has even proposed a referendum on Italy's membership of the Eurozone. But the policy details may ultimately be less important than Grillo's message of protest.
So Marcello, everyone is wondering who Beppe Grillo and his movement is and what they stand for. You've been involved with this movement since 2005.
Yes.
Why did you get involved?
Yeah, I was first interested on the kind of information that was delivering the blog of Beppe Grillo. So it was another kind of information, not the traditional one. So the media that normally are strictly connected with the politician, so with the establishment, really doesn't have a really clue of what is the sense of the people, of the feeling of the people. And not only this, I mean, this kind of information given by the blog were also a kind of sign to say to the people, look, that there is something that you are not so aware of.
And would you say that you are a typical supporter of this movement? Or how would you describe the people who voted for Beppe Grillo?
The people are part of this movement are not only a kind of, this is not a kind of, only a kind of protest. This is really a need of a change on the country. That means the change that we want to have in our country is to re-establish a direct democracy. So the people should be really involved in the institution and be part of the institution. So feel that we are part of the process.
So what would you say? What is this movement's main agenda?
The main agenda, I mean, it's called 5 Star because it has meaning. So we have 5 really stars that starting from free connectivity, for instance, public water, so development, environment, and sustainability on the transport.
Well, I would say these are issues that all parties would embrace. What makes you different?
Yeah, but it is different because we are trying to find the solution and not just giving empty promises.
And there are some people who are saying that this is a new movement, obviously,
Yeah.
for the first time represented in Italian Parliament and Senate. Do you think that the inexperience will be a problem?
I would say no, because if you call experience to, like we had in the past, politicians that are members of the parliament, that are taking place on the parliament and voting only after the decision of the top of the politician, I would say this is not something that we want to do as the same. What we want to do is to bring the people in the institution and leading the real problem to be then resolved. And that is not only a problem of experience, but about knowledge. Because if you are looking on the people that were elected, we have high experienced people that have on all the sector experience and can bring solution as well.
And the solution to what exactly? The corruption, obviously, is very much on your mind.
Yes, of course. Well, in terms of corruption, for instance, or reducing the cost of politics, you don't need to have experience. You just have to do this kind of law, and that's it. What we want to do, for instance, is to make the people part of the parliament not professional politics, but only people that are hired by the politics for 2 mandates, and then they return to do what they do as usual.
Daniel, I see you nodding your head. You seem to sympathize with this movement.
Well, absolutely. So I think what this stands for is a fresh wind. And as you said, it stands for some kind of anti-professional politician behavior. And this, I think, is one of the biggest problems we're seeing today in politics in general. Same in Germany here. We have professional politicians that have been politicians all their lives, starting with, here in Germany, age 14 or so, when you enter the party and you start your career. And what we end up with is a parliament full of people that have no connection to the regular people whatsoever. And this is what is going to hopefully change in Italy here as well. There's a rotation system, if I understand correctly. You will get rotated out of your political position, and that means you cannot stay in there long enough to slowly corrupt into some kind of a piece of this machine that is not attached anymore to the real world.
And in Germany, we have a similar movement, the Pirate Party, which I believe you are a part of.
Yes.
Where do you see the similarities between the Five-Star Movement and the Pirate Party?
So I'm not 100% sure about the content, but on the other hand, I think we're coming from the same perspective, which is that we see that democracy needs a change, we need a facelift, we need to change some of the ways that we are doing things, and this is what we want to do with a Pirate Party too. It's a direct democratic movement. It's very much working with a basis of people. We're not working with high-level people in the party that are taking decisions, but it's the basis of the members that are taking the decisions. And this is where this is very similar. If you look at what happened to the Green Party when they were introduced in Germany, it was a similar idea behind it. They had a rotational system too, for example, which they dropped at some stage. And I think this is part of why they went so much with the establishment these days.
And Suda, how much of the Italian election and the outcome, how much of that is being watched closely in the U.S.?
I think it's being watched closely because what happens in Italy is going to have an impact on Europe, and the Euro crisis is definitely something that American politicians are watching because it has an effect on the health of the U.S. economy.
And both Daniel as well as Marcello are part of political movements that want to voice the political disillusionment. Are we seeing the same trend in the United States, perhaps?
I think so. I think this is a trend for all sort of Western democracies, that people feel disenfranchised. People feel that there's no connection to their elected officials. And we saw this in the United States, both on the left and the right, with the Tea Party movement and also Occupy Wall Street. So I think this is not a phenomenon that's unique to Italy. I think, as Daniel said, it's happening in Germany, it happened in the United States. And it just goes to show, I think the traditional political parties need to do more, need to connect with voters more. And it has to be sort of a noble, being a politician is not a noble profession, unfortunately. I think that is the worldview.
It used to be.
Exactly, and I think they need to get back to why government is important. Why is direct democracy good, but also representative democracy is important. That all needs to be fleshed out for where we are today.
And certainly the U.S. has somewhat experience with showbiz politicians, if you will, such as Ronald Reagan and Arnold Schwarzenegger, Beppe Grillo obviously being one of those celebrities. Angela, Chancellor Merkel's contender, Per Steinbrück, called him a clown, called Beppe Grillo a clown. What do you make of this?
I'm not happy at all. You just see what it came up from what he says because he's like with anger, sorry. But it's not only this. Behind there are, for instance, we got 8.7 million votes. So we cannot say something like he's a clown. So it doesn't represent 8 million of clown, for instance.
So you're saying that statement is lacking respect for all the voters?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you start with saying with a clown, you do not recognize our democracy.
But there are some people who are saying that the Beppe Grillo movement, the Five-Star Movement, wants to criticize, or rather criticizes, without wanting to assume responsibility. They have refused to form a coalition. Don't they have the courage to govern?
No, it's not the matter, because from the very beginning of our election, we established some rules of some code of conduct. And first of all, because we don't want to have something to do with the old-style politics, we said we'll not give any kind of support or alliance to other parties. So, because this is a rule, as well as I told you before, we want to establish two mandates for the elected. We want to first reduce our parliamentary indemnity at 25% instead of, for instance, actually we have a basis of 20,000 euro, and we got only 2,500 euro net.
And speaking of the euro, your movement is not very fond of the euro, is it? If it were up to Beppe Grillo.
Not that it's now set up. I mean, the crisis that are involved all countries in Europe is basically due to the fact that we have not a real central bank. And this central bank should do something to save the public debts in every country, and this is a kind of thing that you cannot do because you do not have the power, because central bank cannot print out new banknotes, for instance.
And Daniel, these anti-establishment movements, such as the Pirates or the Five-Star Movement, they have the tendency to get a following quickly, but then it rather fizzles out quickly as well, no? As we see in the case of the Pirates?
Well, I think it's kind of a political puberty that we're going through. And this involves the fact that at the beginning, as was with the Green Party, for example, lots of people were attracted by the Pirate Party because they thought that this would represent their interests. And a few years later now, maybe they find out that it's not a very conservative party as they thought at the beginning. So even that happens. So they start phasing out because they find out it's not what they thought it was. But that doesn't mean that this whole story is over or anything like this. I think this is just a regular process of growing up. Part of that is becoming more professional in the way that we are doing things, which is happening. Part of that is learning how to represent yourselves to the public, how maybe not to have lots of fighting in the public that's casting doubt on how much you can work together. But this will all sort itself out. I think the Pirate Party was not established to be a quick hit or anything like this, but it's there to stay and to last. And So I think that's what we're going to see over the next few years.
And two movements that also are here to last, or at least they hope so, is the Occupy Wall Street movement and Tea Party, as you said. But they are still part, at least the Tea Party, still part of the Republican Party, isn't it? There's no third-party system still in the U.S. How do you explain that, despite the political disillusionment that you talked about?
Right, there's a lot of hurdles in the United States system, but the founders did, create a system that allowed for a two-party system. It's very hard to get critical mass to form a third party in the United States. In Europe is different. We have parliamentary democracy here. But going back to maybe what Daniel said, I think even if these parties don't have a long lifespan, they change the total system. I mean, look, because of the Greens, the CDU and the SPD today have an environmental platform. I think also because of, the Tea Party, most politicians in the United States, the good and the bad, they all agreed that, that the deficit in the United States is not sustainable. So even if the parties themselves do not survive 2, 4, 3 political cycles, it has an impact on the overall political system.
And how much of an impact do you think, Marcello, will the Five Star Movement have on Italy? Actually, the impact on the ground?
Yeah, the impact, as I told you before, I think that first of all, we are not on the way to give aliens to anybody. This is the first point. Because what we want is really a big change. And at the big change, you have to start from the beginning, so without the old style.
Well, we will see if Beppe Grillo and his Five Star Movement will be able to bring that change to Italy. That rounds out the agenda this week. Don't forget that you can watch the show again online. And don't be shy. Do tell us what you think about the show. Send us an email at agenda.english@dw.de. I'm Ali Hassan in Berlin. Thanks for tuning in and see you soon.